Willow Creek, Montana, population 12.082. A sleepy town hemmed in by jagged pines and the slow-moving Jefferson River. In the mornings, dew clung to porch swings. By dusk, Main Street glowed golden under antique street lamps. It was the kind of town where people still waved at each other in traffic, where sheriff's deputies doubled as little league coaches, and where nothing ever really happened. Until June 17, 2016, Harold Holloway was a staple of Willow Creek. He'd served 2 terms on the city council, taught woodworking at the high school, and spent the last 40 years building custom log homes. Ask anyone, and they'd tell you, Harold wasn't just a neighbor. He was the town's moral compass. Born in 1949, he grew up in Willow Creek, back when the post office was still a one-room shack and the general store doubled as a diner. He enlisted in the Navy during Vietnam, came home to marry his high school sweetheart Karen, and together they raised 3 kids, Luke, Emily, and Jessica. Jessica, now 32 and a nurse at the Bozeman Regional Medical Center, was closest to him. He was my anchor, she'd later tell reporters, tears choking her voice. Even after Mom died, Dad never stopped giving to us, to the town. He was just light. In April 2016, Harold received the all-clear from his oncologist, prostate cancer. Defeated after 9 grueling months of radiation and chemo. Locals remembered the party held in his backyard that spring. Barbecue smoke filled the air. Kids ran barefoot across the lawn. And for once, Harold let himself dance. His old collie, Jasper, barked along with the country music as everyone toasted his new lease on life. But not even 2 months later, on that humid June night, everything changed. The sun had barely dipped behind the hills of Willow Creek when Harold Holloway zipped up his flannel, snapped Jasper's leash onto his collar, and stepped off the porch like he'd done 100 times before. The breeze carried the scent of pine and damp earth, the kind of clean, cold air that only came after a Montana sunset. His MP3 player, an old clip-on one with scuffed edges and a few faded stickers Jessica had slapped on it, blinked to life. Willie Nelson's voice crackled through the earbuds. Jasper trotted ahead. It was their ritual, a quiet walk through East Trail Ridge to clear the mind before bed. But that night, Harold didn't tell anyone he was going. Jessica had just gotten home from her shift at Bozeman Regional and was still in the shower when the front door clicked shut. No note, no keys, no phone, just Harold and the stars. At 10:08 p.m., the dispatcher's line rang. "There's a man down near Pine Hollow Trail. I think he's been shot. His dog's barking. Won't let anyone get close. Please, he's not moving." The call was short, panicked, but it was enough. Deputy Clara Mason reached the scene at 10:15 p.m. Her boots hit the gravel hard as she sprinted toward the trail. Flashlight slicing through tree branches, heart pounding with every bark. And then she saw it. A pair of boots, a flannel shirt, a head of graying hair resting unnaturally still against the dirt. Jasper was whimpering now, crouched beside his owner, licking at his hand as if trying to wake him. The old collie's muzzle was stained a deep, sticky red. The earbuds were still in. The song was still playing. Harold Holloway had been shot point blank. Once, directly in the chest. The wound was clean, but brutal. Close range, shotgun. And the shooter? Gone, like vapor. There were no shells on the ground. No footprints in the hardened trail dust. No tire tracks. Nothing. Jessica was still towel drying her hair when the knock came. A neighbor, breathless, eyes wide, told her what the scanner had said. She ran, barefoot, down the block. When she got there, she saw the flannel, saw the leash, and collapsed before she ever reached the tape. No, that's not him. No, it's not. But it was. And by 11 p.m., the whole town knew. In Willow Creek, you didn't need to wait for the 6 o'clock news. Word moved through back fences and grocery store aisles faster than any anchor could manage. People locked their doors for the first time in months. Curtains were drawn, porch lights flipped on, because Harold wasn't just a neighbor. He was Willow Creek, and someone had just killed him in cold blood. At 10:26 p.m., while the crime scene was still being secured, another call came in, this time from a stretch of road just 3 miles outside town. A cyclist, 32-year-old Drew Collins, Reported he'd just been shot at. His voice on the call shook. "I don't know what the hell happened. Something hit me. My shoulder's bleeding. I think it was a shotgun." Heard a bang. Then a truck sped off. When deputies caught up with him, he was still riding, shirt torn, blood trailing from a graze wound. He refused an ambulance, said he'd rather stay in motion. His story matched perfectly. A shot fired from behind, while riding, by a truck he described as old, boxy, gray, possibly a Chevy, possibly 70s era. And that truck? It hadn't just appeared once that night. An older woman, Lorraine Becker, had been sitting by her window around 9:45 p.m., sipping tea and watching the last of the day die out. When she noticed it, an old pickup, sitting parked across from her house with the engine running, lights off. The driver never stepped out, just sat, watching, waiting. By the time she blinked again, it was gone. When they showed her a composite image based on Drew's description, she nodded slowly. Same truck. The same one that was seen earlier near Harold's neighborhood. The same one caught on a grainy gas station security cam turning off Main Street exactly 34 minutes before the 911 call. Sheriff Warner stared at that footage for nearly an hour. First came Harold, walking slow, hood up, earbuds in, alone, no one behind him. And then, 30 seconds later, the truck, gliding by like it didn't belong. Too slow for the road. Like it wasn't passing through. Like it was following. And then the footage caught it again, this time heading the opposite direction. Faster, disappearing toward Pine Hollow Trail. Random, or planned? That was the question no one could answer. Because Harold had no enemies. Not one. His phone records were dull. His texts mundane. Grocery reminders. A joke to his daughter. An appointment with the dentist. No gambling. No secret affairs. No unpaid debts. His life was clean, honest, predictable. And yet, someone had stalked and killed him with precision. People in town started talking. Some said it was a drifter. Others whispered about an old grudge. But the more they speculated, the less sense it made. Because then came Sierra Lane. She lived in Fort Benton, 2 hours north. Her brother Cody had been hiking a nearby trail on June 4th, just one night after Harold's murder, when a loud pop cracked through the trees. Something slammed into a tree trunk 6 inches from his head. He thought it was a prank. Fireworks, maybe, but now, seeing the news, he wasn't so sure. The story was growing darker, wider. 1 man dead, 2 others shot at, 3 locations, same weapon, same kind of truck. The FBI sent a behavioral unit. They called it pattern escalation. First, the warning shot, then the near miss, then the kill. Jessica refused to speak publicly again. She couldn't. Every time she tried, she froze. Her father wasn't a case file. He was her safety net. The one who taught her how to ride a bike. Who showed her how to change a tire. Who stayed up all night when her mom passed just so she wouldn't cry alone. And now he was gone. Not to illness, not to time, but to someone hunting in the dark. The task force canvassed every mechanic within a 100-mile radius. They pulled sales records for 12-gauge shotguns going back 5 years. Over 14,000 vehicles were examined. 300,000 phone numbers processed. They knocked on every door in Willow Creek, then in Bozeman, then across Jefferson County, and still, nothing. Until late August, when a tip came from a bank teller. He remembered a man named Christopher Rankin. Said he used to drive an old orange pickup that matched the one in the Bolo sketch. Said he had stormed into the branch in May, screaming about missing money, threatening everyone behind the glass. Said the guy had a weird vibe. Unstable. Detectives pulled up his social media. There it was. Photos from 2015. The truck. Bright orange. Old. Rusty. Same build. Then, a few months later, painted white. In one post, he even joked about going incognito. When they found the truck, they scraped the doors. The orange paint was still underneath. When they searched his shed, the half-used bucket of white paint sat by the wall. When they questioned him, he said he'd never been near Pine Hollow Trail. But he knew what music Harold was listening to. Knew Jasper had stayed at the scene. Knew things that had never been released to the public. He said he bought a shotgun but returned it to Walmart the same day. Walmart said they don't take back firearms. Ever. And the receipt with his name said the same. Same gauge, same barrel length, same model. When they pressed harder, the cracks appeared. And finally, he asked for a lawyer. 3 days later, Christopher Rankin was charged with the murder of Harold Holloway and the attempted murder of Drew Collins. But the rest of the town? They weren't convinced he acted alone, or that it was truly random. Because what kind of man hides in the dark with a loaded shotgun and waits for someone just like Harold? The arrest sent shockwaves through Willow Creek. For months, people had been looking over their shoulders, jumping at the sound of backfiring cars, gripping steering wheels a little tighter when driving past open trails. And now, the man whose name they didn't even recognize, Christopher Rankin, was in custody. Not a stranger from another state, not a career criminal, but someone who lived just 25 miles away, in a rusted trailer on the edge of Gallatin County, known by almost no one, remembered only by a bank clerk and a few people who described him as quiet but intense. He didn't look like a killer. 35, long, stringy hair, a beard that hadn't seen a comb in weeks. His mugshot was blank, no anger, no sadness, just empty eyes. And yet, there he was, facing charges for the shotgun murder of a man who spent his last night listening to Willie Nelson and walking his dog. Inside his home, detectives found what they feared. Dozens of notebooks filled with erratic scribbles, drawings of trucks, shotguns, names of local hiking trails, rants about the government, pages that made no sense to most people, but to the FBI, painted a picture of unraveling mental illness. But it wasn't just his writings that disturbed them. There was the bucket of white paint with orange residue clinging to the rim, the .12 gauge ammunition tucked in a toolbox, and a tattered receipt, folded 4 times, proving that Christopher had, indeed, purchased a Mossberg 500 shotgun just 2 days before the shooting. He claimed he returned it. Walmart said otherwise. The signature on the return receipt? His. The clerk who supposedly processed it never existed. He was lying, and he wasn't very good at it. Still, it wasn't enough, not yet. In Montana, like much of the country, you can't convict a man on gut instinct and half-matched evidence. They needed motive, they needed a clear chain. So they brought in forensic audio techs, analysts who slowed down that grainy gas station footage to frame by frame. They enhanced the blurry license plate, teased out letters. It wasn't a full match, but it got close, closer than anyone else they'd looked at. Christopher's public defender argued coincidence. He lived in the area. Old trucks were everywhere. Paint fades. Memory plays tricks. He'd never met Harold, never spoken to Drew. He didn't even own a functioning firearm anymore. But one of the notebooks said otherwise. Buried halfway through a spiral-bound pad was a crude map. Hand-drawn, labeled only with initials. HH was marked by a red dot. The trail circled, arrows drawn toward the east exit. When asked about it, Christopher said he liked drawing symbols. They asked him what HH meant. He didn't answer. For the Holloway family, the silence was unbearable. Jessica kept waiting for something, an apology, an explanation, even a scream. But Christopher never raised his voice, never cried, never said a word that made anyone believe he felt anything. He just waited. And then one morning in December 2018, he was declared mentally incompetent to stand trial. Diagnosed with schizophrenia, he was remanded to a psychiatric facility in Helena, where he was ordered to undergo treatment and monthly evaluations. Every 3 months, the court checked in. Every time, the answer was the same: not ready. Meanwhile, Jessica started writing letters to her father. She left them on the kitchen table. Sometimes she imagined he still read them. Sometimes she even wrote answers back, just to hear his voice again. One letter, written on the 3rd anniversary of his death, read, "They said it wasn't personal, Dad, that it was random, but it feels personal. It feels like the world came apart the second you left. It feels like someone stole everything warm from this house. I miss your bad jokes. I miss the way you always made too much coffee. And I hate that I still wait for the front door to creak open at 10:30 every night." In the town of Willow Creek, things never quite went back to normal. The trail where Harold died was permanently closed. A bench was installed nearby. engraved with his name and a quote from one of his favorite songs, "There's something good in every day." But even that grew weeds. Because people didn't walk there anymore. Not alone. Not at night. In 2019, the court once again reviewed Christopher's mental status. This time, they said he wasn't just incompetent, he was refusing medication, refusing therapy, refusing to participate, and yet, his letters, discovered later in his facility room, were lucid. Intact, structured. Some wondered if he was faking. Others thought he was worse than anyone realized. What no one knew was that the FBI was still watching. Because Christopher wasn't just a suspect in Harold's case. There were other shootings, same weapon, same style, same truck, in Fort Benton, in Livingston, and in the outskirts of Butte. All within the same 6-month window. All still unsolved. One cyclist dead, one woman shot in the shoulder and survived. One school building hit by a slug late at night. A nurse's car windshield shattered in the hospital parking lot. Bullet lodged in the dash. And at every scene, one thing in common. An old, rusted pickup, mid-70s, pale orange, no plates. The FBI never formally linked Christopher to all of them. But privately, several agents admitted it was likely. Chillingly likely. Still, without hard evidence, they couldn't pursue more charges. And in the eyes of the court, Christopher Rankin was still an isolated suspect in a single homicide. Until 2021, after 5 years, dozens of hearings, and over 4,000 combined hours of psychiatric care, Christopher was finally declared competent to stand trial. He entered the courtroom in handcuffs, clean shaven for the first time, his hair trimmed, his expression unreadable. He pleaded not guilty. Jessica sat in the second row, flanked by her brother and the sheriff. Her hand gripped a small, silver keychain, Harold's old house key. She hadn't let go of it since the arrest. The trial never happened. 2 weeks before opening arguments, Christopher changed his plea. Guilty, but not to first-degree murder. To second degree. The prosecution agreed. The attempted murder charge for Drew Collins was dropped. No trial, no testimony, no chance to ask him why. The judge gave him the maximum sentence, 39 years. The courtroom was still. No gasps, no shouts, just the sound of one family exhaling for the first time in half a decade. Christopher Rankin was led away without a word. To this day, he's never spoken about that night. Never said what drove him to pull the trigger. Never explained why he picked Harold, or whether he even knew his name. All that remains are the notebooks, the paint stains, the empty trail in Willow Creek, and Jessica's voice, cracked and steady, telling a local reporter on the courthouse steps. They say he's gone now. But he's not really. My father's still not coming home. I'm still sleeping with the lights on. And somewhere out there, someone else is wondering if their loved one was next on his list. Weeks passed after the sentencing. But the town never truly exhaled. For the Holloway family, closure was a word tossed around by journalists, by prosecutors, by people who didn't understand what it meant to come home to an empty chair. To hear silence where a laugh used to be. Jessica went back to work. But she wasn't really there. Every time she walked into a patient's room, she saw her father, saw him smiling, saw him waving her off with that ridiculous coffee mug in hand. And yet, something still didn't sit right. Because while Christopher Rankin was now behind bars, Willow Creek wasn't the only place that had felt the sting of random violence in that 6-month span. Just 31 days before Harold was shot, a cyclist named Jeremy Kessler had been found dead along a gravel road outside Fort Benton. Cause of death: single shotgun wound to the back. No shell casing. No signs of a struggle. No suspects. 2 weeks later, April 22nd, a young woman named Callie Romero was shot in the neck while driving to her night shift in Livingston. She lived, barely. The bullet had shattered her clavicle. Her windshield told the story, a tight grouping, slightly angled down. Forensics said it was fired from a moving vehicle. No cameras, no witnesses, just glass, blood, and trauma. And then, in September, long after Rankin had been institutionalized, another shooting, a school building in Butte. Late at night, a second-floor window shattered by a single blast. No one was hurt, but that wasn't the point. The message was fear. The pattern was escalating again. The FBI reconvened the task force. Agents reviewed every call from the past year that mentioned an old truck. They interviewed over 80 people who had seen vehicles matching the description, a pale, rusted Chevy or GMC from the 70s. No two statements were the same. Some said the color was more tan than orange. Others swore the bed had rust holes. Some claimed they saw two people in the cab. Others said it was always one. And that was the problem. No clear thread, just a blurred outline, like a ghost shifting through towns with no logic. No rhythm. Sheriff Warner gave a press conference in October of 2021. He stood outside City Hall, wind rattling the podium mic, face heavy with fatigue. His voice was low, steady, the same voice he used to deliver death notifications. The words were honest. We've closed the Holloway case. But we haven't closed this chapter. We believe there may be others out there, victims, survivors, whose stories haven't been connected yet. If you saw something, heard something, felt like something wasn't right that summer, please come forward. What you know might not seem important, but it could be the piece that finally fits. Behind him, a board of photographs: Harold, Drew, Callie, Jeremy, a map with pins, circles, arrows, the kind of thing people expect to see in movies. But this wasn't fiction. This was Montana. This was real. A $50 reward was reinstated. Anonymous tip lines were reopened. The FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit released a statement suggesting the possibility of a localized spree shooter. Someone who may have been inspired by media attention. Someone craving chaos but unwilling, or unable, to articulate why. It was hard not to think of Christopher. His writings, his silence, his disinterest in plea bargaining. The way he described seeing Harold as light in the dark. The prosecutor asked what that meant. He didn't answer. But his journals hinted at something. In one entry, dated May 30, 2016, just 4 days before Harold's murder, he wrote, "Sometimes I think if I make enough noise, God will answer back. The world's too quiet. I needed to scream." For the FBI, that line hit hard. It read like motive, not one rooted in anger or revenge, but in disturbance. In noise for the sake of noise. A chaos born not of hatred, but absence. An emptiness seeking validation through fire. Back in Willow Creek, things continued differently. The bar where Harold used to drink iced tea on Thursdays started closing early. The summer farmers market canceled night hours. Parents kept kids off trails unless they were in large groups. And Jessica? She started volunteering for a foundation that placed security cameras in rural areas, mostly near trails, park exits, and unlit intersections. She said it gave her a sense of power. A small, quiet weapon against randomness. One afternoon, she spoke at a local college. She held up her father's old work gloves. The ones with sawdust still in the seams. He wore these when he built our deck. When he fixed neighbors' fences. When he made birdhouses with my son. And then someone took a shotgun and blew a hole through him while he was just existing. That's what makes this so hard. There's no reason, no resolution. Just a black hole where something good used to be. Her voice didn't tremble. It hardened. I don't want revenge. I want prevention. I want to live in a world where we don't accept random violence as the cost of freedom. I want us to do better. And people listened. The Thompson Education Foundation started a scholarship in Harold's name for high schoolers pursuing trades. A local brewery released a small batch beer labeled Papa's Walk, with proceeds going to neighborhood security improvements. But not everyone moved on so gracefully. Drew Collins, the cyclist who survived the shoulder shot, stopped riding altogether. His bike rusted on the side of his garage. He moved out of Montana the following spring. I couldn't sleep, he told a local paper. Every time I heard a truck backfire, I ducked. I couldn't even look at the trail signs without flinching. I don't blame the town. I blame the quiet. That kind of quiet messes with you after something like this. And then, in January 2023, 8 years after the Summer of Fear, another strange call. A woman in Kalispell reported a man in a white truck following her on a rural road for nearly 20 minutes. She pulled into a gas station, and the truck peeled off. She got the plates. Police tracked the vehicle to a 61-year-old man living alone. No weapons found, no charges filed, but in his garage, There was an old paint can. Orange. The sheriff's report simply noted, possibly unrelated, but documented. The truth is, there may never be a full accounting. Rankin is in prison, serving 39 years. He'll be eligible for parole in 2052. By then, most of the people who sat in that courtroom won't be around to testify again. Jessica doesn't care. She said what mattered most wasn't the sentence, it was the fact that someone finally had to look her in the eyes and admit it happened. Because for too long, that trail had been haunted not just by blood, but by denial. And even if justice came in pieces, it came. They say tragedy ripples, first in small waves, then in crashing silence. In the months after Christopher Rankin's conviction, Willow Creek returned to life, at least on the surface. Shops reopened later, church bells rang on time, and kids began playing again on the schoolyard where laughter had once felt like an insult to the grief still staining the sidewalks. But the truth was, no one really returned to normal. They just adjusted. People flinched at unexpected knocks. Fireworks were banned from local parks. And in a town once proud of its quiet, silence now sounded a lot like fear. The Holloway family, still grieving but forever changed, became accidental voices in a conversation they never asked to lead. Jessica began appearing on radio interviews, podcasts, and panels, sometimes reluctantly, sometimes defiantly. She didn't want to talk about Christopher Rankin. She wanted to talk about the conditions that made him possible. In an interview with KRKT Montana Public Radio, she spoke plainly. Everyone keeps asking why he did it, but maybe the better question is why no one stopped him. How does someone buy a shotgun, paint their truck, scribble their madness across notebooks, and still move through life undetected? She wasn't looking for revenge anymore. She was looking for answers. The Montana State Senate took notice. A bill was quietly introduced, Bill 348, which would require background checks for all firearms sold at non-licensed venues and mandate mandatory reporting for suspected mental health threats involving weapons. It was met with resistance. Second Amendment activists said it was fear-mongering. Rural gun owners called it a knee-jerk reaction. But in the public hearings, when Jessica stood before lawmakers with a photograph of her father, one taken just a week before his death, smiling behind a rack of fresh-cut cedar, something shifted. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just said, "My dad built homes." And someone turned him into a statistic. If tighter checks save one man like him, even one, then what exactly are we protecting by saying no? The room was still, and the bill passed, barely. But in Montana, that still meant something. In the meantime, the FBI quietly wrapped up their multi-year task force. 4 of the 6 shootings from 2015 remained unsolved. Publicly, they said they couldn't link Rankin to those cases definitively. Privately, agents admitted the evidence wasn't enough for trial, just patterns, just echoes. For Callie Romero, the survivor from Livingston, that ambiguity was the real punishment. She still carried shrapnel in her shoulder. She still woke up some nights, gasping for air, with the sound of glass breaking locked inside her ears. She tried not to follow the case. But in 2023, when she saw Rankin's face in the news again, something inside her cracked open. She called Jessica. They'd never spoken. But that night, they stayed on the phone for 3 hours. Jessica later said it felt like she was talking to a shadow version of herself, a woman who had almost shared the same fate, who had been given the chance to suffer instead of vanish. "I was jealous," Callie confessed, "because you got to say goodbye. You had a body to bury. I don't even know what I lost." For Sheriff Warner, the weight of the case never lifted. He'd seen murders before, domestic, drugs, vengeance, but not this. Not the kind of violence that made no sense. Not the kind where the killer left behind no grudge, no confession, not even a whisper of why. At his retirement party in the fall of 2023, someone raised a glass and asked what case stuck with him most. He didn't even hesitate. "The walk," he said, "Harold's walk. Because I still replay that night every time I drive past Pine Hollow. I keep thinking, if someone had seen something, if I'd been 10 minutes faster. But that's the thing with ghosts. They don't tell you when they're coming." The town gifted him a plaque. But tucked inside the manila folder in his garage was something else, a letter from Jessica. It said, "You carried this for me when I couldn't. You showed up when it mattered. My dad would have thanked you with beer and bad jokes. I'll just say thank you with the truth. We survived because someone gave a damn." Meanwhile, in prison, Christopher Rankin remained largely silent. He refused most interviews, refused therapy, spent long stretches in solitary for behavioral issues, including refusing medication and shouting at guards. One corrections officer reported that Rankin once scrawled, "Walking is a sin," across the wall in red toothpaste. When asked what it meant, he only said, "It's too loud." Psychologists debated his competency again in 2024. Some argued he was deteriorating. Others said he was manipulative, playing broken to avoid deeper questions. But for Jessica, it didn't matter anymore. He wasn't the story. Her father was. In the spring of 2024, a statue was unveiled near the newly renovated Pine Hollow trailhead. It was simple, a bronze bench, Harold's likeness sitting casually, hands folded, a small carved dog at his feet. No grand inscriptions, just 4 words. He walked with kindness. Children climb on it now. Tourists take pictures. And sometimes, at dusk, you can still see Jessica sitting beside it, her hand resting on the curve of the bronze shoulder, as if to remind the world that love doesn't just disappear. Even when taken suddenly, even when stolen in silence, it stays. Somewhere. In footsteps. In memory. In every voice that still says his name. In the summer of 2024, nearly a decade after the shootings began, the FBI's final press conference on the Northern Montana Task Force was held under an overcast sky. There were no podium banners, no applause, just gray suits, tired eyes, and the quiet hum of cameras clicking. Assistant Director Nora Hellman stepped up to the mic. She didn't recite a list of accomplishments. She didn't rattle off numbers. She started with a name. Harold Holloway. A pause. He's why this task force began. And while we've closed several chapters, there are still open wounds. Some will never fully heal. But today, we want to acknowledge every person who refused to let this story fade. Behind her stood a board with 6 photos. 6 victims. 2 confirmed. 4 still unknowns. Callie Romero, Jeremy Kessler, an unnamed hospital staff member in Butte, and the student center at Yellowstone West Community College, where a bullet had shattered the library window just minutes before closing time. The shooter was never seen. No shell casings. No motive. The same fingerprints of silence. The FBI officially stated that Christopher Rankin remained the only person charged and convicted in the task force's investigations. But they left the door cracked open. "There is no evidence," Hellman said, "that directly ties Rankin to these other acts. But that doesn't mean it isn't out there." They encouraged the public to revisit memories, to search through forgotten journals, dashcams, social media photos that might have captured a license plate no one noticed. A background blur that could now mean everything. But most people in Montana had already done their searching. And they were tired. Jeremy Kessler's father, Bruce, attended the press conference. It was the first time he had appeared publicly. Until then, he'd refused all interviews. When asked why now, he answered with a voice as rough as gravel. "Because I needed someone to say his name." He held a framed photo, Jeremy in his cycling gear, standing by the canyon wall where the road curved and wind howled. He was riding for a charity, raising money for wildfire victims. That's what he was doing when someone blew a hole in his back and left him in the dirt. And no one, not one person, has ever been held responsible. He didn't look at the cameras. He just stared at the board, at the image of the orange truck, faded, blurred, still watching them all like a shadow just beyond the light. In the months that followed, media attention waned. The story faded from front pages, replaced by newer horrors, louder noise. But in Willow Creek, the absence remained. At the high school graduation that spring, Jessica gave the keynote speech. It wasn't about trauma, or fear, or Christopher Rankin. It was about resilience. She spoke about her father's favorite phrase, "Measure twice, cut once." He'd say it about everything, building shelves, navigating family drama, even cooking. But for her, it meant something else now. "Be sure of what you stand for," she told the students, "because when the unthinkable comes, and it will, you'll need to know who you are." twice as strong, twice as clear. Cut once, and move forward. The crowd stood when she finished. Not because she was a symbol, but because she still stood at all. That fall, a documentary crew from Colorado came to town to film a retrospective. Jessica agreed to one interview. The producer asked if she ever thought she'd forgive the man who took her father. Her answer came after a long, tired breath. No, but I've stopped needing to hate him. Hate is heavy, and I already carry enough. When asked if she believed Rankin had acted alone, her eyes narrowed. I think he fired the gun, but I don't think he built the silence that let it happen. We all did that, in small ways, ignoring things, excusing red flags, pretending rural peace means safety. It doesn't. Peace is earned, maintained, not inherited. The final scenes of that documentary showed Jessica at the Pine Hollow Trail. Fall leaves scattered across the path where Harold had fallen. She was placing fresh flowers beside the bronze statue, white lilies and dogwood. She didn't speak. She just stood, one hand on Jasper's collar, now old and gray but still watching the trees like he remembered. And then the camera panned wide, showing the empty trail, the flickering sunlight through brittle branches, the echo of wind. A voiceover played, not Jessica's, but Harold's, an old voicemail he'd once left on her phone. Hey kiddo. Just letting you know I'm out for my walk. The trail's looking good today. Wind's picking up, though. Might be rain later. I'll be back before dark. Love you. Click. That was the last chapter they gave the audience. But not the last chapter Jessica lived. Because grief doesn't have clean endings. It lingers. In objects. In voices. In gaps between moments that used to be filled. And sometimes, it returns in the form of a question whispered when no one else is around. Why? Still unanswered. Still echoing down an empty trail in Willow Creek. By the spring of 2025, 10 years had passed since Harold Holloway's final walk through Pine Hollow Trail. 10 birthdays, 10 Thanksgivings, 10 Christmases where his chair stayed empty, and his favorite songs played a little too loud to cover the silence. But time doesn't erase pain. It reshapes it. The statue of Harold, once a solemn tribute, had become something else, a meeting point. A quiet place where teens hung their backpacks before class, where widows left flowers, and where strangers sat with coffee and let the wind speak. His story had become part of Willow Creek's bones, not just a tragedy, but a reminder. And with that reminder came something rare. Change. Jessica's advocacy had continued, quietly but steadily. What began as a security camera program in one town became a statewide initiative. Her work, along with the stories of other families impacted by random violence, convinced Montana's Department of Public Health to partner with law enforcement, creating a rural crisis prevention task force. Their mission was simple: to prevent the next Christopher Rankin from slipping through the cracks. The Holloway Act passed in late 2024. It mandated anonymous reporting channels for rural citizens concerned about mental health threats, improved training for local deputies, and offered funding to schools and clinics for early intervention. It wasn't sweeping reform, but it was a start. Meanwhile, in Deer Lodge Correctional Facility, Christopher Rankin lived in a special unit, isolated, observed, often silent for days, sometimes muttering, never admitting guilt, never expressing regret. One guard described his demeanor as staring through you, not at you. When asked in a psychiatric interview if he remembered June 17, 2015, he replied, "Sometimes, but I don't know which parts are real." The court had ruled him competent. The prison held him accountable. But outside those concrete walls, his name faded. And that was exactly how Willow Creek wanted it. In late October, Jessica received a letter. No return address. Just careful block handwriting. Inside was a single photo of Harold from the old days. He was younger, hair darker, standing in front of the very first house he ever built, holding a baby who looked just like her. On the back were 6 words, handwritten in shaky pen. He helped me. I never forgot. There was no signature, no context, just gratitude. She framed it, not as proof of legacy, but as proof of impact. That even in a world where violence can find anyone, kindness leaves deeper marks. At a community storytelling event that winter, Jessica stood in front of a crowd of neighbors, classmates, parents, Even teenagers who hadn't been born when her father died. She told them what she knew for sure. That her dad wasn't famous. He wasn't rich. He never published a book or led a movement. But he listened. He showed up. He built things that lasted. And that, in the end, was enough. Because what mattered wasn't how he died. It was how he lived. In a nearby church, a plaque now hangs on the wall. It reads, "In memory of Harold Holloway, 1949 to 2015. A builder, a father, a friend. He walked in peace." That phrase, "he walked in peace," has become part of Willow Creek's identity. It's spray painted onto sidewalks. It's carved into benches. It's even printed on shirts that kids wear to school fundraisers. Because legacy doesn't belong to the loud. It belongs to those who show up every day and choose goodness anyway. Even in a world that doesn't always make sense. Even when no one is watching. Especially then. And now, if you're watching this, maybe you're asking, what can I do? And the answer is simple. Look around. Notice the quiet ones. Ask the hard questions. Reach out before it's too late. Support the families whose grief doesn't trend on social media. Because violence may make the headlines, but empathy is what writes the ending. So if you take anything from Harold's story, let it be this. A single walk, a single choice, a single person, can change everything. Don't wait for tragedy to remind you of what matters. Remember it now, and carry it forward. If Harold's story moved you, don't let it stop here. Share this video to help more people remember his name, and the names of every person whose story never made the news. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful, human-centered true crime stories, because justice isn't just about the courtroom. It's about awareness, it's about community, and it's about making sure these voices echo longer than the silence left behind. Hit the like button, drop a comment, let us know what you'd like us to cover next. And as always, stay safe, stay aware, and stay human. Thank you for watching.